Getting to space takes years of careful engineering, meticulous planning, and lots of trial and error. But what goes up must at some point come down. So in today's video, I'm going to be counting down the top 15 most amazing space landings. Let's begin. Number 15. Space Shuttle Discovery, STS-124. The STS-124 was a space shuttle mission flown by the Space Shuttle Discovery to the International Space Station in 2008. The objective: deliver the largest module of the ISS, Kibo, to the pressurized section. The mission was the crew's commander Mark E. Kelly's third time in space, with the other 6 crew members making their in-space debut. Members of the crew made 3 spacewalks while out in the vacuum of space, making for about 21 hours worth of time floating in the great abyss. The STS-124's mission lasted a total of about 13 days and 18 hours, when they traveled a stunning 5.7 million miles from Earth and circled our planet 217 times in just a week and a half. On June 14, 2008, it was time to come home, so all 8 crew members returned to their seats and put their tray tables in their upright position to get ready for the re-entry. The deorbiting process is quite a lengthy one, taking up most of the day, but at 11:30 Coordinated Universal Time, they closed the payload doors. Systems were nominal and the skies surrounding the Kennedy Space Center were clear. As we can see in the video, the deorbit burn went off without a hitch, taking place at about 14:10 UTC, and by 15:15 UTC, the STS-124 landed on the runway at the Kennedy Space Center, with pilot Kenneth T. Ham touching down perfectly and deploying the drag chute. A fun fact about the crew of the STS-124 were they were given wake-up calls by NASA while out in space, playing musically specially curated by the friends and families of the individual crew members. Some of the artists they listened to while up in orbit were Lenny Kravitz, John Fogerty, and U2. Number 14. Space Shuttle Endeavour, STS-127. Another mission to the ISS, STS-127 was the 23rd flight of the Space Shuttle Endeavour, taking place in 2009. Their mission: deliver and install the final 2 components of the Japanese experiment module to the exposed facility and the exposed section of the experiment's logistic module. When the Endeavour docked with the ISS in July, it set the record for the most humans in space at the same time in the same vehicle, and the first time 13 people have been in the station at the same time. It's one thing to break world records down on the ground, but to break records in space, that's something else, and it's pretty cool. The shuttle's commander, Mark Polanski, made his 3rd and final trip to space during STS-127, but his crew member David Wolf barely beat him out, having gone to space for his 4th time. The entire mission took about 15 days and 16 hours, traveled 6.5 million miles away from Earth, and orbited our planet 248 times, with crew members making a total of 5 spacewalks. It was crew member and Japanese astronaut Koichi Wakata who stuck the shuttle's landing on July 31st at the Kennedy Space Center. Conditions have to be absolutely perfect for a shuttle to deorbit, meaning there need to be blue skies and golden sunshine all along the way before anyone can come back home. And while pieces of protective foam burnt off during their ascent, it left the shuttle in fine enough condition to safely land. Number 13. SpaceX Crew 4. NASA's budget was cut in more recent years, and so while we're never going to stop sending satellites and epic telescopes into orbit, fewer and fewer astronauts are given opportunities to explore space. That's where private companies and money come in. Elon Musk and SpaceX are doing some pretty miraculous things, sending rockets up into orbit, then bringing them back down in one piece, and even sending people out into the final frontier. SpaceX Crew 4 was the Crew Dragon's 4th NASA commercial crew launched in April 2022. The ship ferried 3 NASA astronauts and 1 European astronaut to the ISS using SpaceX hardware. Their mission, Minerva, was a long one, lasting 170 days and 13 hours. They traveled a stunning 72.2 million miles during their trip and were gone so long that they managed to orbit the Earth 2,720 times. And once they launched, it took them a full 16 hours to dock with their module, and no in-flight entertainment to be found anywhere. Unlike the prior entries on this list, the SpaceX Crew 4 made a literal splash upon re-entry. Instead of touching down via a gliding shuttle like Endeavour or Discovery, the crew plopped down into the waters of the Atlantic Ocean just off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. Their recovery vessels fell to Earth before deploying parachutes to make for as soft a landing as possible. Once they made it back to shore, the astronauts of the SpaceX Crew 4 were flown to NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston for testing. Number 12. Space Shuttle Atlantis, STS-129. STS-129 was a NASA space shuttle mission to the ISS launched on November 16, 2009. The mission was just a quick jaunt, lasting only 10 days and 19 hours, traveling about 7.2 million miles and making 171 orbits around the planet. The STS-129's payload bay carried 2 large express logistics carriers, holding 2 spare gyroscopes, 2 nitrogen tank assemblies, 2 pump modules, an ammonia tank assembly, a spare latch-end effector for the station's robotic arm, a spare trailing umbilical system for the mobile transporter, and a high-pressure gas tank. Everything the ISS body needs. Sadly, though, it was one of the final missions of the Space Shuttle program, making it a bittersweet symphony for the crew, many of whom would never leave our orbit again. Come Friday, November 27th, it was time for the Space Shuttle Atlantis to come home just in time for the weekend. Clear blue skies were above the Kennedy Space Center, and the shuttle began its deorbiting process by flying both upside down and backward over the Indian Ocean. I wonder if an astronaut even notices the difference after living for 10 days without gravity. Well, deorbit burning caused the deceleration of about 211 miles per hour, bringing it down to a speed of Mach 22, and it began gliding at Mach 6. The main landing gear hit the tarmac just at about 9 a.m. as Motley Crue's Home Sweet Home played in the cockpit. Number 11. Venera IX. Space landings don't always mean putting boots on the ground or walking around in space. The first space probe, Sputnik, was shot into orbit by the Soviet Union in 1957 during the space race. The USSR would continue to send cosmonauts and satellites into space for years to come. One of the greatest achievements of the Soviet space program is Venera IX, an uncrewed space mission to Venus. It consisted of an orbiter and a lander. It was launched on June 8, 1975 and weighed just under 11,000 pounds. The Venera IX orbiter was the first spacecraft to orbit Venus, while the lander was the first to return images from the surface of another planet. The Venera IX lander was encased in a unique spherical shell before landing to help protect it from the heat of entry as it broke through the planet's atmosphere. Explosive bolts went off, causing the sphere to separate, and 3 domed parachutes were deployed 40 miles above the planet. The entire descent took a full 20 minutes, while the lander took measurements of the atmosphere and radioed the information to the orbiter. The lander fell 150 feet per second, but as it got closer to the ground, the planet's atmosphere was so thick that it slowed to just 23 feet per second before touching down. And so in 1975, we had our first ever photos of the surface of Venus. It wouldn't be the last time humans sent equipment to that planet, but the first time is always the most memorable. Number 10. Felix Baumgartner. When you have a space landing, you typically can expect some multi-million-dollar equipment to safely touch down. Not on this entry. In 2012, skydiver, base jumper, and all-around awesome daredevil Felix Baumgartner took part in the Red Bull Stratos. He was taken 24 miles into the stratosphere over New Mexico in a helium balloon, took a deep breath, and jumped. He wore a special pressure suit to protect himself 24 miles up. When he was up there, he was literally on top of the world, seeing the planet beneath him as he looked down and realizing that not only is he the only human being not on Earth, but he's also looking at all of humanity at once. It must have been one of the most mind-blowing feelings that only an astronaut could ever really understand. But for Baumgartner, there was only one way down, and that was to jump. The plunge was estimated to last from 5 to 6 minutes, but Baumgartner was in for a real surprise when his free fall lasted a full 10 minutes, easily the longest 10 minutes of his life. He came quite literally tumbling back down to Earth, reaching a top speed of 843 miles an hour. For those that know, yeah, that's Mach 1, meaning Baumgartner broke the sound barrier upon re-entry while falling. He's the first human to go supersonic during a free fall. Not only did he live to tell the tale, but as if with the finesse of a cat, he landed on his feet. Number 9. Apollo 11. Alright, this one should come as a no-brainer. You can't talk about amazing space landings without diving into the first humans on the moon. The Apollo 11 mission was a monument of not only the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union, but a milestone for humanity as a whole. John F. Kennedy gave his famous "We choose to go to the moon" speech in 1962, and despite being behind the Soviets, he promised that we would have a man on the moon by the end of the year. The speech boosted both public and congressional support to increase NASA's budget, and in just 7 years, JFK kept his promise, and the United States made it to the moon on July 20th, 1969. American astronauts Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Edwin "Buzz" Aldrin launched Apollo 11 on July 16th, and 4 days later, their lunar module touched down on the surface of the moon. The 3 men spent 21 hours and 36 minutes on the surface, while 650 million people worldwide watched the spectacle live, huddled around their television sets, setting a new record that wouldn't be surpassed until the marriage of Prince Charles and Lady Diana in 1981. Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins made it safely to Earth as they splashed down into the Pacific Ocean on July 24th, before being picked up by the recovery ship, the USS Hornet. The Apollo program cost over $24 million and is perhaps the most memorable event in NASA's history. The landing gave birth to the two most famous phrases in the English language, the iconic "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," and "The eagle has landed," both uttered by Armstrong. Number 8. Discovery STS-131. Carrying their payload of supplies and equipment for the ISS and geared up to replace an ammonia tank assembly outside the station on the S-1 truss, the Space Shuttle Discovery STS-132 launched on April 5, 2010, spending 15 days and 2 hours in orbit, traveling 6.2 million miles and orbiting the Earth 238 times during its stay in space. This is the longest flight for the Space Shuttle Discovery. Not only that, the STS-131 would be the last shuttle mission to carry a 7-person crew and the final shuttle mission to bring along any first-time flyers. From here on out, it's veterans only. But this is the second flight of the famous TRIDAR, a specialized 3D dual-sensing laser camera used to aid with autonomous rendezvous and docking. It uses a laser-based 3D sensor and a thermal imager. Geometric information contained in a successive 3D image is matched against the known shape of the target object to calculate its position and orientation in real time. The TRIDAR is able to track the ISS position and orientation from the shuttle during docking, undocking, and fly-around operations. But did STS-131 stick the landing down on Earth? Well, it took some time, but yes, the crew woke up to Star-Spangled Banner playing in the shuttle. But as they prepped for deorbiting, drinking fluids to help them get used to gravity again and close the payload doors, they received a message telling them the skies of the Kansas City Space Center were less than ideal. Bad weather set them back a full 24 hours. The next day, Willie Nelson's "On the Road Again" blared through the speakers, and all was a go. After 2 weeks, the landing gear touched down on the tarmac around 9 in the morning, just in time for some real breakfast. Number 7. Virgin Galactic Unity 22. On July 11, 2021, Richard Branson became the first billionaire in space. It finally happened, I guess, having essentially entered a CEO space race with Jeff Bezos. Branson won when Virgin Galactic's VMS Eve took off carrying the VSS Unity in a parasite configuration for a drop launch just 9 days before Bezos. Unity reached an altitude of 53.6 miles, just barely scraping the top layer of the Kármán line, the proposed boundary between Earth's atmosphere and space. NASA classifies the dividing line at 50 miles up, so it's safe to say that while Branson did in fact go to space, Unity 22 did the bare minimum. While none of the crew was expecting to spacewalk out on the ISS, much of the crew were first-time space travelers and experienced the wonders of weightlessness for 4 minutes. The trip didn't last long, less than 15 minutes, and it glided back down to Earth safely. Many aspects of Unity 22's flight set it apart from, say, NASA, but the landing was incredibly fun to watch. Instead of your average space shuttle, the Unity 22 opted for a more futuristic sci-fi look, but that's where the fun stops. The billionaire space cowboy threw caution to the wind with this one, though, and the Virgin Galactic flight came under investigation by the Federal Aviation Administration for deviation from the ship's entry glide cone and entering a Class A airspace without authorization. Number 6. The Cassini-Huygens Project. NASA isn't the only institution looking to the stars, and so the Cassini-Huygens project is a prime example of what can be accomplished when different space agencies put their heads together and pool their resources and knowledge to move the human race forward into a new age of space exploration. The Cassini-Huygens project was born to help explore Saturn and its moons, and it's a collaboration of the European Space Agency, NASA, and the Agenzia Spaziale Italiana. This multinational project is primarily focused on the moon of Titan, and it looks to discover what chemical reactions may be happening within Titan's atmosphere and determine the source of the abundant amounts of methane gas. The Cassini-Huygens project consisted of 2 separate aircraft, the Cassini Orbiter and the Huygens probe of the project's namesake. Cassini was built to continuously orbit Saturn, while the Huygens probe was launched from the former to eventually land on Titan. The mission is structured so the Cassini Orbiter and the Huygens probe can conduct 27 separate scientific investigations. And when the Huygens probe made a safe landing on Titan's surface in 2005, the scientists back on Earth found that this moon's surface consisted mostly of wet sand comprised of tiny ice pebbles. But the probe also detected carbon dioxide on the ground, which doesn't exist in Titan's atmosphere, creating a bit of a fun celestial puzzle for scientists to solve together. The Cassini-Huygens project lasted much longer than expected, with Cassini continuing to orbit Saturn until September 2017, when it finally ended its mission by plunging into Saturn's atmosphere, disintegrating in the process. The Cassini-Huygens project was an amazing and important endeavor, the likes of which the people of Earth had never really seen before. And while it may be sad that the multinational endeavor came to an end, it certainly did with a bang, not a whimper. Number 5. Mars Perseverance Rover. Will we ever know the full truth about the Red Planet? Probably not, but it is worth a shot. The Mars Perseverance Rover, or Percy, is a rover the size of a car designed to explore the planet's Jezero crater for NASA. Launched in July 2020, Percy successfully landed in February of 2021. The rover employed a new technology, terrain relative navigation, which compares images of the surface taken during its descent with reference maps, allowing it to make last-minute adjustments to its course. The rover also uses the images to select a safe landing site at the last minute, allowing it to land in relatively non-hazardous terrain. This allows it to land much closer to its objectives than previous missions, which all had to use a landing ellipse devoid of hazards. Percy needed to come down as smoothly as possible because NASA plans to invest roughly $2.7 billion in the project over 11 years, including $2.2 billion for the development and building of the hardware, $243 million for their launch services, and another $291 million for 2.5 years of mission operations. Percy also holds 2 microphones and 19 cameras, all of equal importance, because the rover's goal to identify Martian environments capable of sustaining life, possibly human life. Number 4. Apollo 13. Houston, we have a problem. Saving people here on planet Earth is one thing, but rescuing them while out in space is something entirely different. But that's exactly what happened with the Apollo 13 mission. This was a tough one, because unlike an incident on a boat or a mountain, NASA can't send a search and rescue team to space. So how did they do it? Well, as Apollo 13 was headed for its destination, the Moon, an explosion happened on board when the vessel was 200,000 miles away from Earth. The astronauts on board, Jim Lovell, Fred Hayes, and Jack Swigert, quickly began looking for not only a way to solve the problem, but for a way home. NASA pulled together truly their best and brightest to navigate problems, like supplying the 3 astronauts with enough oxygen and power as deadly carbon dioxide began to build and the onboard navigation system was totally shot. The incident became a national sensation in 1970 as the crew members rationed out their food, drinking just 6 ounces of water per day, and tried to stay warm in near freezing temperatures. Upon re-entry, Apollo 13 experienced a 6-minute communications blackout, with everyone on the ground immediately fearing the crew had burned up upon re-entry. It must have been a helpless feeling for everyone involved, but thankfully, Apollo 13 splashed down in the Pacific Ocean on April 17, and Lovell, Hayes, and Swigert lived to tell the tale. Number 3. SpaceX Falcon Heavy USS F-44 mission. SpaceX is the proud owner of the most powerful rocket in the world, the Falcon Heavy. Now, before SpaceX, when we blasted a rocket into orbit, that was it. They were one-time use. Millions and sometimes billions of dollars explode before our eyes. But SpaceX has been able to remedy that issue with their rockets. Their most recent mission, USS F-44, took place in November of 2021, when the rocket was set to deliver a payload into Earth's orbit. Everything went off without a hitch when they took off from the Kennedy Space Center. But instead of just exploding or dropping into the ocean, the 2 boosters landed safely in what's been dubbed Landing Zone 1 and 2 in Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. During the flight, the boosters reignited when they reached an altitude of 29 miles for a speed-shedding re-entry burn. Their grid fins deployed to help them guide them onto the designated landing sites before the booster reignited for the final landing burn. Just 8 seconds later, sonic booms crack above the landing sites as the Falcon Heavy's 2 boosters make their synchronized vertical landings. It was amazing and it was absolutely unreal to watch. Number 2. Space Shuttle Columbia, STS-1. Launched in April 1981, STS-1 was the first orbital spaceflight of NASA's Space Shuttle program. Short but sweet, the mission only lasted 2 days, 6 hours, and 20 minutes, traveling over 1 million miles and orbiting our planet 36 times. There's nothing like the first time, and the STS-1 became such a sensation that Canadian kings of progressive rock Rush wrote their song Countdown about the event. Kate Bush included audio footage in her song Hello Earth, and video footage was constantly played on MTV. But there was a lot of pressure to bring the space shuttle home safely. It was the first time she was re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, let alone landing from space. It was a scary time, and hundreds of thousands of people all watched together, huddled around television sets. Tiles from the shuttle were missing, adding to the collective fears of the shuttle burning up upon re-entry, and the communications blackout didn't help either. And when a space shuttle comes in for a landing, there are no rockets, no engines roaring to help. This thing is gliding down all the way from space. One false move, and it's over. But when the landing gear touched down on runway 23 at Edwards Air Force Base, there was a collective sigh of relief. STS-1 had a small crew of just two, Joe H. Engel and Richard H. Truly, both of them who are still alive and kicking to this day. Number 1. Boeing X37 OTV-4. What is the Boeing X37? Well, that's a great question. Also known as the Orbital Testing Vehicle, X-37 is a reusable robotic spacecraft. Boosted into space by a launch vehicle, it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere and lands as a spaceplane. The X-37 is operated by the United States Space Force for orbital spaceflight missions intended to demonstrate reusable space technologies. The project's been in the works for decades, and there is much speculation surrounding its purpose. The most common theory suggests that it's used as a spy satellite or a means of delivering weapons from space. Whatever it is, the Pentagon denies any and all claims, but because it's unmanned, it can do things your average space shuttle can't. On its fourth mission, the OTV-4 launched with the help of a Falcon 9 rocket from the Kennedy Space Center and spent a record-breaking 780 days in orbit before touching back down. Right now, the most time spent in space by a single astronaut is just over a year, so it would seem that the capabilities of the mysterious Boeing X-37 are endless. But one thing's for sure, watching it come plummeting down towards Earth like a comet only to land with such grace makes for the most amazing space landing yet. I'll see you next time.
Watch our Vehicles playlist for more top 15 videos about amazing vehicles. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best vehicle videos.